Thank you so much for sharing your story. Davis and I spoke as we prepared for this, and I have to say I listened to an interview that Davis did, so it was really nice to hear about you following up with Edgar and hearing more about his story. Something that Davis and I spoke about as we were preparing for this is just about how business leaders have a responsibility to focus on more than just profits. But I'm wondering, and I, completely agree with that. And that's, if you know more about Davis's story and Cotopaxi, you know that that's always been his focus. But I'm wondering, in addition to sustainability being good for the world, in your experience and for Cotopaxi specifically, how have your sustainability efforts been good for the brand and the business overall?
Yeah, I did believe from the very beginning that doing good was going to be good for business. And this is when I moved back from Brazil, I went to Silicon Valley and I started meeting with investors, impact investors, angel investors, venture capitalists. And I ended up meeting with 100 different investors to pitch this idea. And I faced a lot of rejection. People that questioned whether I could really build a brand that was sustainable if we were giving away money from the very beginning before we ever made money. But we ended up having some investors that really believed in us and that stood behind us. And so Kirsten Green from Forerunner Ventures was our first backer. I think, we've learned a lot of great lessons, but that number one, I think we validated this idea that if you choose to do good first, that customers will back you. They'll believe in the mission. And if it's done authentically, they'll want to be part of that because you represent values that they also care about. There were some lessons also that we learned that I hadn't really anticipated. One of the things that I didn't really expect to see was the benefits of our ability to attract and retain talent. And so there's a role that I'm searching for right now that we ended up having 1,000 applicants for this role. And I never saw that in my previous businesses ever. I mean, nothing close to this. And when we see applicants, it's everything from young people saying, "Hey, I'm in college and I'm just so passionate about the brand. I'll come sweep the floors. I'll do anything. I just want to be part of what you're doing." And then we have people that are at the tail end of their career saying, "I've spent a really successful career in whatever industry, and I just want to finish my career somewhere that matters, that's aligned with my values." And so I think this is something that speaks to people from every generation, every gender, every color. Like, I think as humans, we care about others. That's what makes us special and unique, is that we care about each other and we try to look out for each other. And we have this desire to make the lives of other people better. And sometimes we don't really know how to do it. So when we find out something that really speaks to us and to our hearts, it's something we want to be a part of. We want to be part of that movement. So we certainly felt that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up, talent and your team. One thing that I really like about your story and Cotopaxi is that when you, we're starting out, you were thinking, yes, sustainability in terms of the environment is important. We definitely want to be aware of that. But the main focus for you was always helping other people, and especially, people that you knew from living in other countries that, were in extreme poverty. But then, on top of that, something I've been thinking about a lot, I shared with you that I attended a brand insider summit, hearing from a lot of retail brands a couple of weeks ago. And something very unexpected for me, at least, is that because of the pandemic, people and talent is such a priority at all levels of a business, for every brand right now. And it's part of their brand image. How do people understand the employees of a certain company to be treated? How are the employees essentially representing that brand at every level? So I'm wondering, at Cotopaxi, how do you get your employees involved in your sustainability initiatives, and how has that kind of benefited your team?
Yeah. So, this has been something that's been important to me. Something I've talked a lot about it within our organization is being a keeper of the flame. We can't create a movement and can't be part of changing the world if I'm the only one that is holding the flame, that is the flame bearer. We need every person in our organization to be a keeper of that flame. We need our customers to be keepers of the flame. And so the way we do that is by engaging people and allowing them to be part of this movement. And so We started that by, the day that we launched our brand, we started with an event called the Questival, which was this 24-hour adventure race. And it was a pretty crazy event. We got a couple llamas off the classifieds, and we went around college campuses, and people came up to us to take selfies with these llamas. And then we tell them about this new brand that we were building, about this event, this 24-hour adventure race. And we had thousands of people that participated in that first race, and we gave them hundreds of challenges to go out and spend time in the outdoors with their friends, and to go do good in their communities. And they got points for doing these different kinds of activities. And we ended up having 30,000 social media posts of people out living the brand, and everyone that did the race got one of our backpacks. And so that was kind of the start of like saying, hey, we want other people to be part of doing good with us, not us just doing good ourselves. And our team, same thing. We started, in our early team, there were just about 6 of us that when we started, and then we slowly added a few more people. And that card writing program that I talked about, the refugee card writing program, that was an idea from an intern of ours. When we first started the business, I was doing the handwritten thank you cards to every customer. I knew it wasn't scalable, but I wanted those early customers to know how much it meant to me that they were supporting us. And this intern said, hey, I know that you're worried about that. You can't keep writing these thank you cards, but what if, she's like, I know how passionate you are about refugees. And I was starting to get involved in some refugee programs here in Utah when I moved here from Brazil. And we came up with this idea together with this intern. And so, same with the Del Dia line of bags, those really colorful, one-of-a-kind ideas. That wasn't an idea I had. It was an idea one of our product designers had, knowing how much we were passionate about the workers in the supply chain, and how do we make their lives more fulfilling? How do we make sure that they're paid fairly? How do we make sure that they have work that allows them to use their skills and talents and develop professionally? And so, a lot of the very best ideas we've had as a brand have come from our team, by empowering them and by basically inviting them to be part of this exploration with us of how we make the world better.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I have one more question that in the interview that I listened to that you did, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit in your talk at the beginning, but I know that the very first company that you started was a website called pooltables.com. And in the interview that I, listened to with you, you talked about how, you knew you wanted to do good in the world. You thought, if I could make some money, I can turn around and use that money to fund initiatives that are important to me and will help other people. And so, you started this business, pooltables.com. Fast forward many years later, you start Cotopaxi, and you go about starting Cotopaxi in a very different way. You held yourself to very high standards. Cotopaxi is a B corporation. You knew that giving back was going to be inherently part of the business. So I'm wondering, what is the challenge of, or what is the difference between starting a business, with those sustainability standards from the outset versus taking an already successful business and, turning it around or making it be more sustainability focused?
Yeah, this is a fun question. So, when I was in college and I came back from Peru, I thought I would pursue this path of working for a nonprofit. I thought that was maybe my life's calling. And it was a mentor that I met in college that kind of redirected me. And he'd been a successful entrepreneur and had become a philanthropist. Had started a nonprofit in the Philippines that was fighting poverty. And I wanted to work for him. And I tried to convince him to let me go work for him and to expand his program from the Philippines to Latin America, where I'd grown up. And he instead told me that if I really wanted to make a difference, I shouldn't go work for a nonprofit or for him. I should go start my own business, and that down the line, I'd be able to make a bigger impact and find my own way of making an impact in the world. And so that put me down this path of entrepreneurship. And I knew nothing about business. I hadn't studied business. I'd studied international studies in undergrad. But I had this idea, a random idea. I kind of dabbled in a few different ideas. A couple actually, they had social impact connected to them, but the ideas didn't work. They as I tested them, they kind of failed. And but I found this other idea, which was to build a company called pooltables.com, which was this idea of building our own brand of pool tables and then selling them direct to consumers online. So kind of one of the earliest direct to consumer digital brands. This is in 2004. So the internet was, relatively new. E-commerce was relatively new. But the brand had no social impact at all. And all the passwords of that business were connected to social impact and helping children in poverty and other things. And so it was in my heart, but like, I just didn't know how to connect business and doing good. Like, it just wasn't obvious to me for some reason. And so I thought, maybe I just need to learn how to build a business first. So I spent about 6.5 years building that business. And, it was a great first time, experience as an entrepreneur. Our first year, we did about $1 million in sales, and then we kept growing from there. And after 6.5 years, my cousin and I sold the business. And then we went off to business school, and my cousin went to Harvard Business School. I went to the Wharton School. And then when we graduated, we moved down to Brazil and built our previous business. And so, when I started building Cotopaxi, I wanted to build it completely differently than I'd ever built another brand. And it started to become more obvious to me how I was supposed to connect impact and brand and business. And, you mentioned this interview that I did a couple of years ago with Guy Raz with How I Built This podcast. And it was a really fun conversation. And he asked a lot about that pool table business. At the time, I had no intentions of ever being involved with that business again. I sold it, a decade before. But last year had an interesting opportunity where I still owned a small part of the business. And the guy that we'd sold it to was retiring, and he had 17 different businesses that he'd kind of gathered over the years, and he was selling them all. And he'd found a buyer for the business, a small publicly traded company that was going to buy the business. And at first I was glad for him. I was like, good for him. That's great. And the more I thought about it, the more I just felt like I had unfinished business. Like, that brand was my first attempt at entrepreneurship. And I really wanted to do good, but I didn't know how, but I know how now. And so I ended up buying the business back. I paid a lot more than I sold it for, but I believe in the ability for business to make an impact. And this business had been profitable for 18 straight years. And I just thought, I'm going to go convert it to a benefit corporation. So I bought the business the first day. I converted it to a benefit corporation. And now we're working on creating a plan where this business can help us go fight poverty alongside Cotopaxi. There are some unique challenges, with a brand like Cotopaxi that starts from the beginning with impact at the very heart of the brand. In some ways it's easier because you're so committed to it from day one and you can kind of build everything around it. At the same time, it's really hard because you have no money. And so you're donating and giving away money before you've ever made money. And that was incredibly stressful. Where with this pool table business, it's been profitable. So in a lot of ways, it's been a lot easier because we have the resources to go have impact immediately. And so, but it's been a fun thing to kind of see the challenges that come with taking an existing business and converting it to a business that's doing good versus doing it from the start. But my hope is that I can prove that no matter what the business is, no matter how old it is, no matter what industry it's in, you can go do good. And if a pool table business can go make a difference in the world, so can your business. So that's what I'm hoping we can prove.
Yeah, I love that message. And I think too, just with your idea of doing capitalism differently, and no matter what your role is or what business you're in, you can do good. You do have an impact on the people around you, the people you work with every day. So I love that. That's great. We got a few great questions from Jeffrey Hilder in the Q&A. I think the one it might make sense to ask you first is just as a purpose-driven brand, how are you and your team measuring success?
Yeah. So, obviously there's a few ways that we measure success, and some of those are financial success and some of those are impact success. And obviously we need to measure both of them. We can't have success with our social mission if we're not having success as a business. So, I'd say that's one of the things that really matters to us. The last 3 years we've been profitable, and that was a really big milestone for us because I knew that we couldn't sustainably do good if we weren't sustainable ourselves. So that's of course a very important measure, and we've seen some very exciting things there. This year we're going to double our revenues. We'll double in size this year alone, and so we're seeing a lot of really fun growth in the business. But of course, what's most exciting to me is the impact that we're having, and so that's what I wake up thinking about every morning. It's what gets me out of bed and keeps me so excited about what we're building, is the impact that we can have. So last year we helped almost 1.3 million people, living in poverty. And so that was just a massive milestone. The first time we've crossed that million people mark. We have an impact report that we publish every single year that kind of outlines our impact and talks about our impact partners, talks about those three pillars that I mentioned before: education, healthcare, and livelihood training, and where we're focusing those dollars. And of course, it's not just money that we donate, but we also are team volunteers, and we have a lot of impact through our supply chain and other things that aren't necessarily reflected in a dollar amount that's donated. We also, last year in 2021, we donated over 200,000 face masks to communities in need, which was about $700,000 worth of impact as well. And so these are the kind of things that we just are very passionate about. And I'm not an impact expert. Something I'm very passionate about and I'm learning. But we've hired some really great people on our team that are experts and that make sure that we're doing this in the right way. The first year in the business, I ran the impact side of the business as well. And it was really fun. At the same time, when we brought someone on that knew what they were doing, man, it was a game changer. And we just started doing things in a much more disciplined way. I think we hired a chief impact officer before we even had a marketer on our team. And you can imagine what my board thought about that. They were really questioning whether that was the right place to be investing dollars that early in the business. But I just figured if we couldn't figure out a way to give better than anyone else and do it in the most sustainable way, in the most impactful way, we had nothing. That was really, the entire brand was built on this idea of giving. And so I wanted to do that right. And so I think that's been an important part of our impact, is making sure we have impact experts that can come in and help us make the best decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of leads to another one of Jeffrey's questions, and something I've heard you speak about. It's tough, I think, to, as a brand, know the impact that you're truly having. You've talked about kind of, making some mistakes and learning things in the beginning to understand how best you can do this. And I think we've all heard of brands that, are intending to make some kind of positive impact and then have unintended consequences, or maybe aren't doing everything that they say that they're doing, or something like that. So Jeffrey's curious, how do you balance the purpose messaging, or letting, the world know about all of the good things that you're doing, with the sales messaging and letting people know about your product? And, I would almost take it a step further. How do you make it so that you're not just trying to not make it seem like you're just trying to do these good things to sell more stuff, essentially?
Yeah. No, that's really important. When I had the idea for the business, I went and met with a couple of friends of mine from business school who had started Warby Parker. And, they'd invested in my previous business in Brazil. I'd done a small investment in Warby Parker when we were still students. They were still selling out of their apartments, like just very, very small business still. And so we'd been friends and kind of been rooting for each other's success. And I outlined to them like this idea of building this brand, the Cotopaxi, around impact. And one of those co-founders mentioned to me that, he really felt that I needed to be careful to not lead only with mission, that I needed to have, I really needed to have great product as well. And so, because every time I talked to him about the business, it was about the mission and the purpose. And he's like, make sure that you nail the product, because you have to nail that as well. And it was really great advice. And because I'm so passionate about the mission that I tend to lead with that constantly, whether I'm talking to an investor or to consumers, or even like this presentation, right? It's like, I'm not even really talking about the product. I'm just so passionate about what we stand for and our purpose. And so it is a tricky balance of how do you balance these two things? And I'd say we've probably erred on the side of always having our mission first and talking about that. At the same time, if you go to our Instagram, there's a lot of imagery that's around the product and around, people using the product around the world, and kind of the aspirational aspect of the brand. And so it is tricky. And I don't know that we've actually totally nailed it either. Like I just had a conversation with our executive team yesterday about how, and our impact team and our brand team, about how I want our impact to be more at the forefront of the brand. Like this cannot be on the periphery of who we are. It can't feel like an afterthought. Like this needs to be deeply woven into everything that we're doing. And so again, I would probably lean more towards talking about the purpose than selling, just because of my inclination. That's what I'm really passionate about. And I think if you do it right and you do it authentically and it's real, consumers are very smart. They know if it's not real. They know if you're doing it because you're trying to get something out of it, or if you're doing it because it's something that's authentic to who you are. And so, but it is a tricky balance, and not every business has gotten it right. And I will maybe just add, Rachael, that I think it's okay if a business is trying and maybe they fall short. I'm not saying that they can misrepresent. Obviously, that's unacceptable. But I think a lot of businesses are learning how to. They've been around for a lot of years, and they're trying to figure out how they can be part of this movement. And I want to be careful. I don't want to criticize any business that's using their resources to go do good. My hope is just that all of us are learning, and that we can find better ways over time to do it more authentically and have better impact. And I hope that more and more businesses move in this direction. And I think it's young people that are going to make this happen. They expect it out of the companies they work for. They expect it out of companies they support and buy from. So I'm very optimistic about the future of business. I think capitalism will absolutely change in a massive way in our generation, or in the next generation or two, because of the expectations of young consumers and the young generations.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I like that perspective of yours, because I think that it is all about authenticity. If brands are authentically trying to do something good, they're inherently going to make mistakes, and it's about owning those mistakes and moving forward and just trying to improve, like we're all trying to do in our roles all the time. So I'd like to know a little bit more about your advertising model. I mean, I think this kind of goes into what we were talking about, and really a lot of the retailers that I spoke to a couple weeks ago did talk about this millennial and Gen Z audience and how they can really sniff out anything that's not authentic. So I think that's part of this conversation as well. But I know too that, as you talked about, I feel like your first advertising activation involved llamas and college campuses. So how have you all evolved since then, and how do you focus your marketing efforts?
Yeah, so there's definitely not a silver bullet. I know when you, as an entrepreneur, you start a business and you just think, oh, if I could just find that one thing that like changes things and that like gets me on the map, or that gets this business to work. The reality is that there isn't just one thing. You have to do 1,000 things really well. And I'd say with advertising, yes, those events, those experiences that we created with Questivals were really impactful in the early days. We had that first event in Salt Lake City where we're based, and then we had the next one in San Francisco, and then we had one in Las Vegas, and then Seattle, and we started doing them all over the country. And we had over 100,000 people participate in those early events where people were actually living the brand. And I think that's why the event worked, is like, it wasn't just us trying to sell something. It was allowing people to go live the brand values that we had of adventure and giving back and serving others and creating memories together. And so, those experiences were really important. But of course, you have to be good at some of the traditional marketing, digital marketing, making sure that you're efficiently acquiring customers and creating awareness around your brand. Of course, there's PR strategies around, how do you make sure that you're in the press and that people are talking about some of the good things that you're doing, or how you're building a brand differently. There's ambassadors, brand ambassadors that, and influencers through social media. And so, I'd say we do all of the above. You have to do all those things really well. I think, really probably the most unique thing though that we've done is that idea of creating experiences that allow people to go live the brand, and not just through Questivals, but through other opportunities of service and giving back. We hold a lot of events around supporting refugees, and I think those are always great activations that allow people to go not just donate, but to actually get involved in some of the good work that we do.
Absolutely. In the interview I listened to with you, you talked a lot about how Cotopaxi was a digitally native brand. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and how you all built up your digital presence, and how you sort of balance that with your presence with your brick and mortar stores and the retail partners that you work with?
Yeah, so this term digitally native brand, I think it emerged maybe in the last like 6 or 7 or 8 years. And it's something obviously that had existed before. I mentioned the pool table business being like one of the earliest digitally native brands. And what I mean by a digitally native brand means a business that started and emerged online first. and that primarily their primary sales channel was online. And so a lot of digitally native brands have become omni-channel brands where they're not just selling online, but I mentioned Warby Parker. There's another brand started by another classmate of mine from business school called Allbirds, and another called Harry's. These really fun brands that have been built around not just selling online, but they have physical retail stores of their own. Many of them actually sell their product through other retailers. Like, we sell our product through REI and through hundreds of other small boutique outdoor retailers. And so, I think, this is an evolving, digitally native brands are evolving. We're not just online. We don't only sell digitally, but we have this DNA as part of our brand that we emerged online first, and that we understand how to acquire customers online. And it's unique because a lot of, in the outdoor industry, for example, there's so many brands like, Patagonia has been around for 50 years, the North Face for 60 years, Columbia for 70 years. These are brands that didn't understand e-commerce and the digital consumer, as well as maybe small emerging brands like ours. And so it was an advantage that we had. And of course, we also start moving in the direction of some of these more traditional brands of selling through other retailers and other things. But that digital DNA is an important part of why we exist and how we compete.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that, of course, being digital and having that kind of be the beginning of your brand probably helped you all during the pandemic and everything that's been happening the past couple of years. Can you speak a little bit about just some of the challenges that your brand went through during the pandemic, but also some of the ways that, you've talked about some of the ways that your team really came together and how that inspired you as well?
Yeah. So I'm sure everyone's really exhausted of talking about, the pandemic, right? But, there were some really great lessons learned during these last couple of years. And, for us, our revenue was cut in half in March. So instantly, the first impact, interestingly, was e-commerce. It was like, that's where we saw the first signs of softening, and we knew something was happening. This was in the first week of March. Our e-commerce sales started sliding. And then, by March 13th, we closed our retail stores. Many of our retail partners closed their stores. And a lot of our corporate partners that were buying product, jackets or bags for their corporate events or for their teams, many of them started coming to us saying, hey, we want to cancel that order. And it was terrifying. I was very nervous. And, but we met on March 16th, Monday. I had an all hands meeting, virtual, our first virtual meeting. And I told our team, I basically outlined a plan of how we were going to get out of this. And it involved everyone taking some collective sacrifices, but we all rallied together to protect each other and our team. I invited everyone to innovate and to think of ways that we could double down on our mission. I made a commitment that every dollar that we'd made in commitment to giving back would go to giving back. We would never use those dollars to support the business. Even in a crisis, like I felt that was very important. And I said, let's find now a time, like in this crisis, this is the time where we can show our true colors. And let's give back more now than we ever have. And we actually gave, in 2020, we gave 3 times our commitment. We commit to 1% of revenues. We gave 3%. We gave every dollar that we could to giving back and to supporting our community. And because of that, we ended up seeing a really great response from consumers. In Q3, the most outdoor brands that we had data for, which most, a lot of the public brands, they grew 2% year over year in Q3 of 2020 compared to Q3 of 2019. And that was like their first up quarter. Q2 was really down for most of these brands. Q2, we were flat somehow. And then in Q3, we grew 96% over the previous year. Since the beginning of the pandemic, our revenues are about 4 times bigger than they were. And this is more growth than our industry has seen, but it's because I believe we've been so committed to our social mission and that people feel that connection to that. So, I'm really proud of the response that we had during a really challenging time. Really proud of the team and how we rallied together. And we made some big changes, some really big changes in the business and how we operate because of COVID as well.
Yeah, I love that, how you know, talk about how perhaps, you know, the growth that you all have seen is connected to just consumers thinking more about the companies that they're invested in and what those companies' values are. I think that's absolutely, you know, probably contributed to the success that you all have had despite, you know, everything that's going on. Somebody asked a great question, and I should say, you know, if folks aren't familiar with the Cotopaxi products, I guarantee you've seen people walking around in brightly colored jackets and backpacks that have the little llama logo on them. They do have some really, really cool products. We have a store here in San Francisco. And so John Graydon asks, why did you choose apparel as your business model? And, you know, why did you choose that as kind of the vehicle to give back?
Yeah. So a few thoughts on that. Number one, I did what I knew and understood, which I hadn't built an apparel brand, but I understood e-commerce. And so I kind of gravitated towards the idea of building a brand that I understood. As someone who loves the outdoors and loves adventure, this is a category that I'd always had some interest in. And I felt there was an opportunity to build something that really scaled. I knew that if I wanted to build something that could truly impact poverty and truly help eradicate poverty, I needed to be able to build something that could really be big, like $1 billion business or bigger. And so I felt in this category, while it's very crowded, the outdoor industry has so many brands, and a lot of investors like didn't invest in us because of that. They felt it was, you know, a very challenging category. I felt there was an opportunity to go build a brand differently. And so, you know, that was, that was kind of why I chose this category. You know, when we launched the business, we launched with 5 backpacks. We didn't have any apparel to start. And then about 6 months later, we launched our first 5 jackets. And so we kind of gravitated towards packs and outerwear for a couple different reasons. You know, e-commerce is challenging when you have a fit issue. So for example, shoes, e-commerce shoe companies really struggle, and there's some big ones that have emerged, but they're challenging because like shoes, the fit can be really challenging, or even bottoms can be a challenging business because people have, you know, unique fits. They want it to fit right. Where backpacks, they're made to fit any body type. They can adjust. And so they're like return rates I knew would be a lot lower. Outerwear, if you have a jacket, you kind of know if your size is maybe small, medium, large, extra large, double extra large, like you kind of know your general size. And so return rates I knew would be a lot lower. So that's one of the reasons also I kind of gravitated towards these categories that maybe fit wouldn't be as quite a challenge as it maybe is for some other products.
Nice. I like that. And I know that your first company you started before Cotopaxi was an apparel company too. So yeah, like you said, that was an industry you knew. And I wouldn't have even thought about you know, the fit challenges, but that's absolutely a concern for anyone who orders things online is, oh, am I going to have to return this?